Well, we've started on Plato's Republic Part 3 of a 10-minute segment. So, we're talking about how Plato's dialogue, The Republic, sees the government and way of life in society as a machinery to produce people of a certain character. And I'm very much reminded of Immanuel Kant, a philosopher, points out in his Ethics that whenever we make other people to be an end in themselves rather than some means to an end, then we're morally on a right track, on a good track. But whenever we view individuals, people, society as means to achieve some other end rather than ends in themselves, then we're in the beginning of some kind of iniquity or injustice or unrighteousness, wickedness. When people become cannon fodder to further war, or pawns to achieve some goal. And so I really think that this notion of Plato, so noble, and I'm reminded of Jefferson, how he had this very unusual notion at the time of free education, compulsory education for all. And at that time, education was only for the elite, who privileged, and it was considered that people who had to be farmers or servants or what have you, soldiers, didn't need this kind of elaborate educational process. And yet Jefferson realized that this newfangled nation, a republic that draws its power of the people and by the people and for the people, would not succeed unless all people were compelled to be educated and fashioned in a certain manner, in a certain method. And Plato does speak of this idealized process of government as having a philosopher king who would be an absolute ruler that would be in charge, but would be very wise and very benign and kindly and well-intentioned. I certainly think throughout history one can hardly find a better candidate for Plato's philosopher king than Marcus Aurelius, who was just a noble man and scholar, and he was around 100, 120 AD, and his teacher was the poor slave philosopher Epictetus, who was a Stoic philosopher around 90 AD. And their writings very much reflect each other. The moral discourses of Epictetus and the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the king, emperor. And I think it's one place we can look and see what sort of thing this philosopher king might be, how we might envision it. And also, I'm reminded to point out that recently there was a celebration of George Washington's birthday, and scholars pointed out how noble and disciplined he was to seek to resume private life at the end of his term, when he might easily have been tempted to try and usurp power to himself for a longer period of time and to become a tyrant. And of course, he realized that had he not been willing to freely step down and let someone else take charge, this whole new kind of government would fail, a government of the people, by the people. So that's something noble about his term in office. And of course, Roosevelt was elected to his fourth term in office and died in that fourth term because people were afraid during the war to switch horses midstream. But after that, one saw rulings effected to limit to 2 terms in office. So I think that one can look at the cyclic aspect of society, constantly going back and forth over the ages between more conservative and more liberal ways of life, more or austere and more decadent, more rigid and xenophobic versus more open-minded and egalitarian. And in a sense, whatever becomes accepted becomes the status quo. And that's just the way things are with the majority. And then there's always some minority who feels pinched or hampered in some fashion. And they resist to become, they become some kind of opposition. And then finally someone harmonizes them and gets a new position which is in between the two. And so it goes on and on. Just as Hegel speaks of a thesis which then develops an antithesis in opposition to it, and then someone synthesizes these two things into something that's one that can serve as a thesis to again begin the process. So I do hope that little clock is working faithfully and will tick when I've timed things properly. Anyway, there's almost built-in nature of someone. There'll always be someone who feels downtrodden or hampered in some way, and so they're always going to try to rebel against the status quo. One will always see societies moving back and forth between very liberal policies of perhaps indulgence or perhaps equality for many, and then swinging to very conservative ways of things where perhaps one does not see many social programs as good and sees more of a laissez-faire kind of let things take care of themselves without undue supervision. I'm just wondering if this alarm will actually go off. It must be like an act of faith to feel confident. And oh, now up here it does tell me I'm doing going on 8 minutes of recording, so that is a way for me to judge, and I can stop recording this